Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis, the second line from the top. Our Mishnah stated in regards to Rosh Hashanah, do we look at it as 2 days of Kedusha, two separate Kedushos, or one long Kedusha? Rabbi Yehuda says it's like 2 different days of Kedusha. And therefore Rabbi Yehuda says if a person wants to make 2 Eruvin on Erev Rosh Hashanah, one in one direction for the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and set out a second one for the second day of Rosh Hashanah in a different direction, he may do so. Whereas the Chacham argue and say, no, since it's Kedusha Achas, one cannot do that. Similarly, the Machloikis is also in the case of a Kalkala. When you have a basket of peiros that are Tevel, that means that peiros that have not taken out Trumas and Maises from. Here again, Rabbi Yehuda states that a person can make a Tanai, as the Gemara will explain how that works. He'll make a Tanai both on the first day and the second day and eat those peiros on the second day, being misakein those peiros and making them edible, taking out Trumas and Maises. Only again because it's 2 days of Kedusha, whereas the Chacham argue again and say it's only 1 day of Kedusha, one long Kedusha, and therefore that would not be permissible. A third case where the Mishnah states is when a Beitza is nolda b'yamtif rishon shel Rosh Hashanah. And here again, Rabbi Yehuda says that a person can eat that Beitza on the second day of Rosh Hashanah because it's 2 different Kedushos. As the Gemara will explain how that works. But the Chacham are of the opinion, no, that is one long Kedusha, and therefore that's not going to be permissible. Says the Gemara, V'tzricha, and we need all 3 cases. The Ashmo'in in Rosh Hashanah, meaning the first case in our Mishnah. In this, Rabbi Yehuda would say his din, that you can set out 2 different Eruvin because you're doing so on Erev Yamtif, not on Yamtif itself. Aval kalkala de mechzi kemesakein tivla ema moedilu rabbanon. But in regards to the basket of fruit, there, when a person is mafrish, trumas and maestris, it's a form of what seems to be appearing like a tikkun kli. He's been mesakein the peiros. And there, maybe Rabbi Yehuda would agree with the Chacham, that's prohibited. Kamash malan, Rabbi Yehuda maintains that that's permissible. V'yashmo'in hani tarti, and if I would only have taught these 2 cases, then mishum delo leka lemegza alayu, because there's no gezerah on such cases, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda maintains that it would be permissible. But aval beitza deika lemigzar bo mishum peros hanoishrim umishum mashkin shezavu ema moedilu l'rabbanon. But in the case of the beitza that was nolda on Rosh Hashanah, on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, I might think that there's a gezerah otu peros hanoishrim. That's a gezerah that if fruit fell off the tree, they're prohibited because maybe a person won't come to then take out from the tree. And similarly, there's something called mashkin shezavu, that if you have the juice that oozed out of, let's say, grapes or olives, then it's prohibited to use that juice because maybe a person might come to squeeze the grapes or the olives. And therefore we would say that maybe in the case of Beitza Shenolda, that would also have these gezeros. Komash Malan, Rabbi Yehuda still says it is permissible a Beitza Shenolda on Rosh Hashanah to be eaten on the second day. Tzrich, and therefore we need all 3 cases. The Gemara now brings the following brisa in regards to the Kalkala Shel Peiros, that is Tevel, and explains how Rabbi Yehuda indeed will show that a person can make certain Tanai on each day, allowing then the peiros to become edible for the second day. Tanya, Keitzad Rabbi Yehuda Masne Odam Al Halkal Kol B'Yomtiv Rishon V'Oichle B'Sheni. How does Rabbi Yehuda say you can make a Tanai on this basket of fruit, so that it'll be permissible to eat on the second day? This is the following procedure. Says the Gemara Brisa, Hayu lefonav shtei kalkala shel teva. Here, the Brisa chooses to use a case of 2 baskets, but it's the same thing like in our Mishnah if it's just 1 basket. Oimer, he states the following: Im hayoim chol ulamachar kodesh dehei zu trumal zu. If today, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, is considered to be chol, then I'm being mafrish the truma. Here, we're talking about truma, but huadin would be meiser as well. and it should be then chal on this fruit. V'im hayoim kodesh ulamachar chol ein bedvarei klum. But if today rather is kodesh and only tomorrow is chol, then my words are inconsequential and it's not chal the hafrosh of trumas and maasros today. V'kara leshem umenicha, and then he states he's kara shem that trumas and maasros is taken out and he leaves them. The second day comes back, ulamachar hu oimer, he states, im hayoim chol tehezu trumalzu. If today, the second day of Rosh Hashanah, is chol, then I want the trumas and maasros to be taken out. V'im hayoim kodesh ein b'dvarei klum. And if, however, today is kodesh, then my words are inconsequential. V'kara le'ashem v'oichla. And then he designates it as trumas and maasros, and he can go ahead and eat the other peiros. In other words, based on the fact that he made such a t'nai, both for the first day and the second day, thereby one of those days is chol, and the hafrasha was chal, whereby he can go ahead and eat the second day. Rabbi Yosi prohibits, because Rabbi Yosi says, since it's all one day of kedusha, it's a kedusha arichta, both the first and second day are kodesh, you cannot make such a t'nai because neither one of those days could be chol. V'chein, and adds the brayso, haya Rabbi Yosi oiser b'shnei yomim tovim shel golios. That Rabbi Yosi says not only when it comes to Rosh Hashanah do we then look at the 2 days as being yom achas arichta of kedusha, but Rabbi Yosi also is mechadesh a chumrah in regards to 2 days of golios. That means 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, of Pesach rather, or 2 days of Sukkot or Shavuos. Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios, he says, is one long kedusha as well. The Gemara now brings the following incident: Hahu bar Tavya da'aseh lebei Reish Galusa. There was a deer that was ultimately brought to the house of the Reish Galusa on Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios. It says the itzid b'Yom Tov Rishon Shel Golios v'ishtachit b'Yom Tov Sheni. The first day of Yom Tov was trapped by Gentiles. And subsequently it was given to the house of Reish Galusa, and they shechted this deer to make for the second day Yom Tov Suda, so they shechted on the second day. Rav Nachman and Rav Chizda ochlu, Rav Sheshes lo ochal. Rav Nachman and Rav Chizda, they ate, they partook in this meal that was prepared, the venison that was shechted on the second day and prepared for the second day Suda. But Rav Sheshes did not eat. Omer Rav Nachman said, "My ovid leil Rav Sheshes de lo ochil bisra de tavia." In other words, Rav Nachman was surprised. Why is Rav Sheshes not eating this bosar? In other words, even though the tzeda is a malacha that one cannot be neheneh from, although the Gentile did it, but since the Gentile did it for the first day, so then you can benefit for the second day because it would be considered to be a long enough period of time that it could have been trapped and been mutter for the second day. So therefore there wouldn't be a prohibition on the second day. In other words, assuming that since there's 2 days over here and 1 day is Safek Yom Chol and 1 day is Safek Kodesh, so therefore if it was trapped on the first day, even if that first day was Kodesh, so then the second day is Chol. So even if they did a malach on the first day, you can still then wait enough period of time the second day to serve it. It would have been able to be trapped during that day. So you have the ability of what's called Kadesh Yaseh, so that the malacha would have been done and now it's permissible to be eaten and get benefit from on that second day. And if today, the first day was Chol, so then certainly was no problem of trapping the animal on the first day. So Rav Nachman does not understand why Rav Sheshes did not partake in this deer. Omar le Rav Sheshes vehechi oichel the tani isi. How could I eat? After all, isi taught. He taught in a brayso that we're going to quote, and which we already just saw a glimpse of, that Rabbi Yosi says that 2 days of Yom Tov Shel Golios, that means Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios, is considered to be one long kedusha. Another version, Va'amrei le, he says it not in a nichusa, but with tamiyah. He says, Tema, isi tani, behold, isi taught. Then how can I possibly eat the venison today on the second day of Yom Tov Sheni? It's all one long kedusha. V'chein haya Rabbi Yosi, and this is what he taught in the brayso. Rabbi Yosi said, Oiser b'shnei yamim tovim shel golios. He prohibited the 2 days of Yantiv Shal Galios because it's considered to be one long Kedusha, L'chumra. Omar Rava said, Umay Kushya, what is the difficulty that Rav Sheshes had with the statement that Rav Isi taught in the name of Rav Yossi? Dilma Hochi Kamar, maybe this is what it was saying. V'chein haya Rabbi Yossi, Oimer, b'shnei yomim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah begoyle. Maybe what Rabbi Yossi meant to say was that in Chutz La'aretz, in the diaspora, they will also then have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. In other words, it's going to be one long Kedusha of Rosh Hashanah in Chutz La'aretz. Ihochi, asked the Gemara, shel Golios begoyle mi boyle. It's an inaccurate and also a misleading type of language. If you say Golios, it implies that in Eretz Yisrael, then there is not going to be 2 days of Yantiv of Rosh Hashanah, and that's not true. And therefore it is said, Begoyle. In Goyle, referring to the outside of Eretz Yisrael, you'll also have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah of Yantiv in Rosh Hashanah. But the fact that it didn't say it in that way, it would mislead us to think there's not 2 days of Rosh Hashanah in Eretz Yisrael, and that's not true. So Omar Rav Asi suggests the following to explain the words of Rabbi Yossi. Umay kusha dilma hachika Omar. This is what Rabbi Yossi meant to say. V'chein haya Rabbi Yossi oise isa shnei yamim tovim shel Golios ki shnei yamim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah l'Rabbanan desharu. Perhaps what Rabbi Yossi, this is what he meant to say, is like this, that the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah in Chutz La'aretz is like the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah according to the Rabbanan, and therefore they view it as 2 days of 2 different Kedushas. I'm sorry, they view it as 2 days of Kedusha, right? That are shari, that would be permissible. And that's what Rabbi Yossi meant to say. But he wasn't talking about 2 days of Yom Tov Sheni, dahainu, 2 days of Pesach, or Shavuos, or Sukkot. And therefore, according to this, then Rav Sheshes really should have eaten the venison, because then there's certainly nobody would say that it's one long day of Kedusha. Even Rabbi Yossi, according to this, would say that it's 2 different days of Kedusha. Ashkechei Rav Sheshes l'Rabba bar Shmuel. It states that Rav Sheshes, who did not eat this venison, he encountered Rabbi bar Shmuel. Omar lei, he said to him, Tani mar midi b'kedushos. Did you teach in regards to the Kedushos, if it's 2 days of Kedusha, one long Kedusha in terms of Yantav Sheni Shal Galios? Omar lei, he said to him, Tanina, moide Rabbi Yossi b'shnei yamim tovim shal Galios. He stated that Rabbi Yossi agrees that in regards to Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galios, that there's 2 different Kedushas. It's not one long Kedusha. So unlike when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, which is one long Kedusha, but he agrees when it comes to Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galios, let's say 2 days of Pesach, that is 2 different days of Kedusha. So again, according to this, it would come out that Rav Sheshes was incorrect for not eating the venison. So Omar Leh, he said to him, Imeshkachas lehu, if you come in contact with Rav Nachman and Rav Chizda, who did eat the venison, lo tema lehu v'lo midi, don't say anything to them at all. In other words, I'll be embarrassed because I did the wrong thing. The Gemara now brings another version of this incident that we just brought in regards to the deer. Omar Rav Ashi stated, Lididi Omar li Ameimar. To me, Ameimar said the following, Hahu bar tavio lav itzude itzid. This deer that we're talking about was not an issue of being trapped by Gentiles on the first day of Yontif, Ella michutz litchum also, but rather it was an issue of being brought from outside of the tchum. We're on the top of Mem Amud Aleph, on the first line on the top. Man de ochal savar haba bishvil Yisrael zeh mutal Yisrael acher. The one who ate, namely Rav Nachman and Rav Chizda, they held that since it was brought from outside the tchum, granted, it would be prohibited to the Jew that it was brought for, but for other Jews, it would be permissible. Uman deloy ochal savar kol de osi lebeireish galusa adaite de kul rabban osi. Whereas Rav Sheshes, who did not eat the venison, he held that the one who brought it, didn't bring it for a specific Jew, but rather brought it for the entire household of Reish Galusa, which includes anybody who would partake in the food. Thereby would be prohibited for him to eat. And that's why he didn't eat. Ask the Gemara if this second version is referring to a case that took place on that day, where a Gentile would bring it on that day from Chutz L'Tchum, but we said before that Rav Sheshet encountered Rabbi Shmuel. He asked him, in Yontif Shein Shal Goli, is it 2 days of Kedusha or is it one long Kedusha? What was the question? That question didn't have any meaning, any bearing on this case. Because after all, in this case, we're talking about on that day, it was brought from Chutz L'Tchum. The Gemara says, Lo hayu dvar me'olim. The Gemara says, V'amar le means V'amar le, and this is a continuation of that incident, that he asked him a question, and he said back to him, to which the Gemara has a question. Why was he asking such a question? It doesn't have any bearing on this scenario, if it was brought from outside the Tchum. To which the Gemara answers, is not a question, because Lo hayu dvarim me'olim. Lo hayu dvar me'olim means didn't ever happen. In other words, according to this scenario, you're right, Rav Sheshet never encountered Rabbi Shmuel, never asked this question.